If you enjoy these stories about humanity at its finest, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications.
The marketplace of Leviathan's maw was a cathedral of commerce, its vaulted ceilings stretching impossibly high, carved from the fossilized bone of a dead god. Sunlight, filtered through the colossal ribcage, cast long shadows across stalls of iridescent minerals, bioluminescent fungi, and creatures that pulsed with soft, rhythmic light. Elias Thorne stood at the edge of the main thoroughfare, his weathered face a stark contrast to the vibrant chaos around him. He adjusted the collar of his worn ENV suit, the fabric stiff with dust from a dozen forgotten worlds. Beside him, Kalen adjusted the plasma cutter at his hip, his hands steady despite the low hum of the crowd. "You sure about this, Elias?" Kalen asked, his voice tight. "The Void Dancers don't negotiate. They take." Elias grunted, his eyes scanning the crowd. "We're not here to negotiate. We're here to buy time." He gestured to the towering structure at the market's center, a colossal, fossilized heart, encased in a shimmering energy field. That was the life spring, the source of the Maw's ecosystem, and the reason the Void Dancers had arrived. They were nomads, a fleet of hollowed-out warships that had never known a home world, and they saw the Maw not as a sanctuary, but as a resource to be stripped. Lyra, the youngest of the crew, clutched a data slate to her chest. Her fingers danced over the surface, her brow furrowed in concentration. The energy readings are unstable. If the Void Dancers breach the Life Spring's containment, the entire ecosystem will collapse. It'll be a chain reaction. Then we make sure they don't breach it, Elias said, his voice low and steady. He turned to the others. Rena, her eyes sharp and analytical. Jax, his arms crossed over his broad chest, and Dr. Eris, whose hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his medical kit. "Our mission is simple. We hold the line until the evacuation is complete. We buy them time." The Void Dancers' ships hung like black stars against the Maw's interior atmosphere, their hulls scarred with the marks of 1,000 conquests. They had been watching, waiting, their patience as vast and empty as the void they traversed. And now, they had made their move. The first warning came not from a sensor, but from the sky. A shadow fell over the marketplace, thick and absolute, as one of the Void Dancers' dreadnoughts descended, its engines silent, its hull a seamless void that drank the light. The crowd panicked, vendors scattering, their wares left behind in the rush. Elias's team moved like a single organism, forming a defensive perimeter around the life spring. "They're here," Kalen muttered, his hand resting on the grip of his plasma cutter. Lyra's fingers flew across her data slate. "They're deploying boarding pods. Hundreds of them. No life signs inside, drones. Automated. Even better," Jax said, cracking his knuckles. "Less to think about." The first pod slammed into the marketplace's outer shell, the impact sending shockwaves through the bone. It burst open, revealing a swarm of metallic spiders, their limbs clicking as they scuttled forward. Elias raised his hand, and the team opened fire. Plasma bolts carved through the drones, melting their armor, severing their limbs. The air filled with the scent of ozone and burning metal. But there were too many. More pods descended, their drones swarming like locusts. The team fell back, their retreat a measured dance of fire and movement. Rena's energy shield flickered as a drone slammed into it, the impact sending her stumbling. Jax caught her arm, pulling her back. "Stay with me, document." Dr. Eris knelt, his medical kit forgotten as he pulled a small device from his pocket. "I've got an idea. These drones are networked. If I can overload their comms, maybe we can blind them." "Do it," Elias said, firing another burst into the advancing swarm. The drones kept coming, their numbers undiminished. The life spring pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, its energy field flickering as the drones breached the outer defenses. Elias's team was pushed back to the base of the heart, their suits dented, their breaths ragged. The drones were now swarming around the energy field, their metallic claws scraping against the barrier, each impact weakening it further. "We can't hold them," Kalen said, his voice strained. "There are too many." Elias glanced at Lyra, who was still hunched over her data slate, her face pale. "The evacuation?" "Nearly complete," she said, not looking up. "But the life spring's containment is failing. If it goes, everything goes." Dr. Eris held up his device, a small, humming orb. I've got the comms overloaded. The drones are blind now, but they're still coming. We need to buy more time. Elias nodded, his eyes fixed on the life spring. Then we give it to them. He turned to the team, his voice calm, resolute. Rena, you and Jax hold the line. Kalen, you're with me. Lyra, stay with the life spring. Dr. Eris, whatever you're planning, now's the time. The team split, moving with practiced precision. Rena and Jax formed a wall of plasma fire, their bolts stitching a line of destruction through the drone swarm. Kalen followed Elias as they moved deeper into the marketplace, their goal clear: disable the Void Dancer's dreadnought. The ship's hull was seamless, featureless, save for a single, narrow airlock. Elias aimed his plasma cutter at the lock, the beam scorching the metal. We need to get inside. Find their power core. Kalen nodded, his eyes scanning the hull. There's a maintenance hatch. 2 decks up. We can climb. They moved, scaling the bone-like structure of the maw, their boots finding purchase in the fossilized ridges. The drones swarmed below, their blind movements erratic, but still a threat. The maintenance hatch was small, barely big enough for one person at a time. Kalen went first, his movements silent, practiced. Elias followed, the hatch sealing behind them with a hiss of pressurized air. They were inside the dreadnought, the air cold and sterile, the corridors dark and empty. This ship is dead, Kalen whispered, his voice echoing in the silence. Not dead, Elias corrected. Waiting. They moved through the corridors, their footsteps muffled by the thick plating. The ship was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, each one identical, each one silent. Until they heard it, a low hum, vibrating through the floor. The power core, Kalen said. They followed the hum, deeper into the ship, until they reached a massive chamber. At its center, a sphere of swirling energy pulsed, casting a blue glow on the walls around it. This was the heart of the dreadnought, the source of its power. Now we just need to shut it down, Elias said, raising his plasma cutter. But as he took a step forward, the lights flickered on, revealing the Void Dancers. They weren't human, not even humanoid. They were tall, slender figures of polished obsidian, their faces smooth and featureless, their movements fluid and silent. They stood in a semicircle around the chamber, their obsidian hands raised, their bodies humming with energy. You are not welcome here. A voice echoed, not through speakers, but in their minds. It was cold, ancient, devoid of emotion. We're here to stop you, Elias said, his voice steady. The Void Dancers moved as one, their obsidian forms blurring as they attacked. Kalen fired, his plasma bolts striking their chests, only to dissipate harmlessly. They were immune to conventional weapons. Elias dodged as one of the figures lunged, its obsidian arm passing through his shoulder, sending a jolt of cold energy through his suit. He gritted his teeth, firing again. Nothing. They're made of energy, Kalen said, backing away. We can't hurt them. Then we do something else, Elias said, his mind racing. He looked at the power core, then at the Void Dancers. They were connected to it, their energy drawn from the sphere. If he could overload it, maybe he could hurt them. Kalen, cover me, Elias said, sprinting toward the core. The Void Dancers turned, their obsidian forms converging on him. Kalen fired, keeping them at bay as Elias reached the core. He slammed his hand against the control panel, the energy sphere flaring wildly. The Void Dancers screamed, not with sound, but with pure, psychic energy, their forms flickering as the core overloaded. The ship began to shake, alarms blaring as the core destabilized. Elias and Kalen ran, the dreadnought crumbling around them as they escaped back through the maintenance hatch. The explosion was visible even from the marketplace, a brilliant flash of blue light that consumed the dreadnought. The shockwave sent debris raining down, but Elias and Kalen were already back on the ground, joining the others at the life spring. You did it, Lyra said, her eyes wide. The drones are shutting down. The swarm is breaking. But the celebration was short-lived. The remaining Void Dancer ships descended, their hulls now glowing with a malevolent energy. They weren't retreating. They were preparing to attack. They're going to ram the life spring, Rena said, her voice tight. Elias looked at the team, then at the heart of the maw, pulsing with its fragile light. We knew this might happen. Jax cracked his knuckles. Then we give them hell. The Void Dancer's ships descended, their engines roaring as they accelerated. Elias's team moved to intercept, their plasma fire cutting through the air. The ships were fast, their movements unpredictable, but the team was faster. Kalen fired a volley into the lead ship's engine, sending it spinning out of control. It crashed into the bone structure, the impact shaking the marketplace. But more ships came, relentless, their energy weapons carving trenches in the ground. Rena's shield flickered as a blast struck her, sending her stumbling. Jax caught her, firing back, but the ships were too many. "We can't stop them all," Kalen said, his voice grim. Elias nodded, his eyes fixed on the life spring. "Then we make sure they don't get past us." The remaining Void Dancer ships were now descending directly toward the life spring, their energy weapons charging. Elias's team stood their ground, firing until their plasma cutters overheated, until the air was thick with the smell of burning metal. Jax was the first to fall, a blast striking him square in the chest, sending him crashing into the fossilized bone. Rena screamed, firing wildly, but another blast struck her, her energy shield shattering. She fell, her body still. Kalen fired one last volley, his plasma cutter exploding in his hands. The blast sent him stumbling, but he kept fighting, his fists clenched, his face a mask of rage. Elias watched, his heart heavy, as the ships closed in. The life spring pulsed, its light dimming. The evacuation was complete, but the cost was too high. Then he saw it, a glimmer of hope. The Void Dancer's ships were not just attacking. They were converging, their energy fields merging into a single, massive beam aimed directly at the life spring. "They're going to overload it," Lyra said, her voice trembling. "If that beam hits, the maw will be destroyed." Elias looked at the team, at the Fallen, at the life spring. Then he looked at the ships, at the converging beam. He had an idea. A crazy, desperate idea. "Kalen," he said, his voice low. "You remember the override codes for the maw's internal defenses?" Kalen nodded, confused. "Yeah. Why?" "Because we're going to turn the maw against them." Elias sprinted toward the central control panel, the one that regulated the maw's internal defenses. Kalen followed, firing at the Void Dancers who had begun to descend, their obsidian forms glinting in the fading light. The panel was ahead, but so were they. "Cover me," Elias yelled, diving for the panel. His fingers flew over the controls, inputting the override codes. The maw groaned around them, the bone structure shifting, the pathways narrowing. "They're closing in," Kalen yelled, firing again. Elias slammed his hand on the final command. "Now," the maw responded. The bone beneath the Void Dancer's feet began to shift, rising up like the jaws of a beast. The obsidian figures stumbled, their forms flickering as the ground moved beneath them. The converging beam destabilized, its energy scattering. "It's working," Lyra cried, her eyes on her data slate. The beam's failing, but the Void Dancers recovered. Their ships fired, their blasts striking the rising bone, carving through it. The maw's defenses were holding, but barely. "We need more time," Elias said, his fingers flying over the panel again. "Kalen, the stabilizers. We need to reinforce the bone." Kalen nodded, sprinting toward the stabilizer controls. He input the codes, the bone around them hardening, the rising structure becoming more solid. The Void Dancers' blasts bounced off, their energy dispersing harmlessly. "They're trapped," Elias said, a grim smile on his face. But the Void Dancers were not done. Their ships began to self-destruct, their hulls glowing with unstable energy. The explosions would be catastrophic, enough to destroy the life spring, the maw, everything. "We have to stop them," Kalen said, his voice tight. Elias looked at the team, at the Fallen, at the trapped Void Dancers. Then he looked at the self-destruct sequences on his data slate. He had one last resort. "Kalen, get back to the others," Elias said, his voice steady. "Elias, no. It's the only way," Elias cut in, his eyes fixed on the self-destruct sequences. "I can overload their ships from here. But it'll take everything. I won't survive." Kalen stared at him, then nodded, his jaw set. "Good luck, old man." Elias smiled. "Don't need luck. Need a big enough bomb." He input the final command, the energy surging through the panel, the maw groaning around him. The Void Dancer's ships exploded in a chain reaction, the blasts tearing through the bone structure, but the life spring held. The silence that followed was absolute. The marketplace was in ruins, The bone structure scarred and broken, but the life spring pulsed with a steady, rhythmic light. The evacuation was complete. The maw was safe. Elias was gone. His sacrifice had saved them all. Kalen stood at the edge of the marketplace, staring at the wreckage. The other survivors gathered around him. Lyra, her eyes red-rimmed. Rena, leaning on Jax's shoulder. Dr. Eris, his hands trembling as he tended to the wounded. "He did it," Lyra whispered. "He saved us," Rena said, her voice thick with emotion. Kalen nodded, his throat tight. He looked at the life spring, then at the sky, where the Void Dancer's ships had once hung. They were gone. The threat was over, but the cost was too high. Elias was gone. A figure emerged from the wreckage, obsidian and silent. It was one of the Void Dancers, its form flickering, its energy dimming. It approached Kalen, its movements fluid, its face still featureless. "You are the one who survived," the voice echoed in his mind. Kalen raised his plasma cutter, but the figure didn't attack. It simply held out a hand, a small, obsidian object resting in its palm. "A gift," the voice said. "From the Void Dancers. We understand now. The maw is not a resource. It is a home. We will not return." The figure turned and walked away, its form dissolving into the shadows. Kalen stared at the object in his hand, a small, fossilized bone, carved with the symbols of the maw. "He gave his life for this place," Kalen said, his voice rough. "And they understand." Lyra placed a hand on his arm. "He didn't just save the maw. He saved them, too. From themselves." Kalen nodded, clutching the bone tight. The maw was safe. The Void Dancers were gone. And Elias Thorne, the warden who had underestimated until the end, had become a legend. The maw healed in the weeks that followed. The bone structure mended, the marketplace rebuilt, the life spring's light growing stronger. The survivors honored Elias's memory, not with monuments, but with vigilance. They became the new wardens of the maw, its protectors, its guardians. Kalen stood at the edge of the life spring, the obsidian bone in his hand. He had placed it at the base of the heart, a symbol of the peace Elias had bought with his life. "He would have liked this," Lyra said, standing beside him. Kalen nodded. He would have. The maw was safe. The Void Dancers were gone. And the legacy of Elias Thorne lived on, not in words, but in the quiet, steady pulse of the life spring, in the watchful eyes of its new guardians. The universe was vast, full of threats, but here, in the heart of the maw, there was peace. And that was